Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, Mississippi's 3rd District Congressman joins us. Republican Michael Guest is the vice-ranking member of the House Committee on Homeland Security, and he's a member of the House's Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We'll talk about the critical needs of infrastructure in this state, Hurricane Ida's aftermath, and the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and much more. Congressman Michael Guest, now on Mississippi Insight. Congressman Guest, thank you for joining us here on Insight this morning.
Byron, thanks for having me back again.
The U.S. House is preparing to take up a bipartisan infrastructure bill before the end of this month. You expressed your concerns about this $1 trillion package. For our viewers, what are those concerns that you have with the bill? You
know, my main concern is just government spending as a whole. Earlier this year, Congress passed a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. The infrastructure bill is roughly $1.2 trillion. The human infrastructure package that we expect to go through Congress under a budget reconciliation plan is additional $3.5 trillion. So you look at that $6.5, $6.6 trillion in addition to the hundreds of billions of dollars every year that we add to the national debt. At some point, you know, I'm very concerned that, you know, we're passing this debt along to our children and grandchildren. And so I have great concerns with the size and scope of these. You know, when we start talking about bills in the trillions of dollars, that is 1,000 billions every time you start talking about trillions. So the numbers begin to continue to grow, continue to escalate. I believe that we need to do what we can to shrink the size and scope of government, and so I'm very concerned when we see these huge $1 trillion packages working their way through Congress and really no way and no effort to try to get spending under control.
What can Mississippi gain from this bill, and what portion and how much would Mississippi get out of all this?
Mississippi would gain approximately $3.5 billion over a 5-year period. As I understand, our current MDOT budget is roughly $1.2 billion a year. And so this would add $3.5 billion over a 5-6 year period. So it would be a substantial increase for that period of time. But when you talk about Mississippi only getting $3.5 billion of a $1.2 trillion bill, you know, I don't believe that the money is targeted. I believe much of the money that we see, even in the bipartisan infrastructure package, does not go to things that we would consider important for infrastructure here in Mississippi. There's not enough money for roads, not enough money for bridges. We see far too much of the money in that bipartisan infrastructure bill being spent on green new energy proposals. And so based on the size of the bill, the cost of the bill, and really the limited resources that Mississippi would get when you talk in comparison to the total cost of the bill, at this point it's not something that I feel that I'm going to be able to support.
Is there any leverage? Do we have any leverage here to get more money from this bill?
You know, there is always the chance that the bill has been passed out of the Senate, made over to the House. There's the opportunity, if the Speaker allows, for us to make amendments to the bill. We'll have to see if Speaker Pelosi will allow that. She is trying to link, of course, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill with the $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation package. And we saw at last week when we were in D.C. That many of the moderate Democrats want to see those bills separated. They don't want those bills tied together. They want a straight up or down vote on the $1.2 trillion infrastructure package and don't want to have that $3.5 trillion bill being used to force members to vote for either both or none of the bills. And so it still remains to be seen. Once we return back September the 20th back to Congress, we will see, I believe, very quickly these bills be brought up to the floor for a House vote. But at this time, much of that remains in the hands of Speaker Pelosi.
What would you support?
You know, I would support a bill of a much smaller figure. You know, if you're talking about something roughly half of that, you know, $500 to $600 billion, again, with much of that money being spent on traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, sewage, rural broadband, which is very important to Mississippi. And I would like to see that money be sent to the states, and the states then have the authority on how to spend that money. I am always and have always opposed the one-size-fits-all model because I do not believe that that works well. I believe that the infrastructure needs in Mississippi are far different than the infrastructure needs of, say, California or New York. And so the fact that this money, I believe, should be sent to the states, and the states should have the authority on how to spend that money, I believe is very important. In Mississippi at this point, we don't have a great need for electrical vehicle charging stations, but that is mandated there in the bill that there be a build out of these EV charging stations. And again, that's just not a need we have in Mississippi. But we see that we do have our roads and bridges. We saw the road collapse after Ida came through, and we saw that there were 2 fatalities and multiple others injured. And so those are where Mississippi needs to be spending our dollars. And so if I had the chance to write the infrastructure bill, that would be the things that I would prioritize.
How much money do you believe that Mississippi needs from an infrastructure bill?
You know, I can't speak of that. You know, again, you know, I have had the opportunities to meet with our transportation commissioners, and they talk about the fact that we are still working on a 20-year-old plan in some places, that we've not adequately been able to fund projects that were prioritized 20 years ago. And so, you know, and it also depends on what part of the state that you're in. If you're here in the metro area, we need additional roads so that we can eliminate traffic congestion. And more rural parts of the state, they need money to repair roads and repair bridges that because we've not adequately maintained them are in a state of disrepair. We know, looking at the city of Jackson, we see the infrastructure needs that they have, particularly water and sewage. We see what the ice storms that we had last year and the length of time that we had individuals who were without the ability to get fresh running water. That those are issues that we need to address. Again, but the problem that I have is this bill is so big, so large, so encompassing that much of the money that will be spent in the $1.2 trillion bill will not be funds that will be spent here in Mississippi.
With the power collapse and the devastation in Louisiana and New Orleans, particularly the transmission power outage, what is your thoughts on power infrastructure and what needs to be happening? Not only we had there, but we also had during the ice storms in Texas and elsewhere.
Well, you know, our electric delivery system has not been properly maintained. It's not been properly upgraded. You're right. We saw when Hurricane Ida passed through that we had some of the transmission lines there outside of New Orleans that collapsed. And that's something that we need to begin to start working on. I believe that there will be FEMA relief money to help New Orleans as it seeks to rebuild, as we seek to restore power. You know, but we see down there that they're talking about as many as 6 to 8 weeks that people are not going to have power there in South Louisiana and New Orleans. We remember 16 years ago when Katrina came through, the devastation that we had to our electric delivery system. And so I believe that is something that the federal government needs to be working with state governments and working with some of our private partners like Energy and some of the other energy delivery companies to make sure that they have what they need first to be able to restore power and get the lights on, and then ultimately what do we need to make sure that our electric delivery system is prepared for the next time that we have a major storm or a major hurricane, because we know it's going to come. It's just a matter of when the storm is going to come, the intensity of the storm, and you know, are we going to be better prepared for the next storm than we were for this one?
You mentioned the $3.5 trillion that the Democrats want to get past the other spending bill. Is there anything about that bill that you would support or that you would see that needs to be out there? You
know, the bill's still being written as we speak, and so at this point I can't speak as to what would be in the bill, things that I might support, may not support, because at this point there are various committees in both the House and the Senate that are currently drafting that legislation. Once the legislation is drafted, I'm going to review the legislation myself and my staff, and we're going to look at things. And so I am sure that there will be parts of the legislation that would be beneficial for the people of Mississippi, and particularly the people of the 3rd Congressional District. You know, but again, my concern is a $3.5 trillion bill at a time in which we are continuing to run huge budget deficits. And also in there, you know, I expect that there are at least this conversation that there's going to be tax increases as far as individual income tax rates, capital gains, corporate tax rates, estate tax are going to be raised. There's also talk in there that is going to incorporate components of the PRO Act, which would hurt pro-rights, right-to-work states like Mississippi. There's also talks about the possibility of amnesty being in there. And so at this point, we really don't know what's going to be contained. All we know is that there's been an agreement within the Democratic Party that they're going to have a top line of $3.5 trillion. We know that there are going to be tax increases in the bill. bill. But as far as the other particulars of this bill, at this time, the text of the bill is still being drafted, and so we're unsure exactly the other things or the other programs that are going to be affected.
And they've talked about that will be extended child care tax credit expansion, and universal pre-K and quality affordable child care, paid family medical leave, support for affordable housing, expanded Medicare to cover dental and vision, and also Medicaid expansion. Are those some of the things that you could see supporting possibly?
Well, again, if we can figure out how to pay for that, you know, I think those are things that we would like to see. One of the things they talked about in the bill was free community college. You know, I think we would all like to see, you know, free community college or reduced costs on community college. But again, you know, nothing is really free. At some point, somebody is paying for that, and so you're either putting that on the backs of the taxpayers, or we're continuing to add to the debt. And one of my huge concerns is, you know, I'm a physical hawk. I don't want to see us continuing to run up the debts that we've run up. And again, we ran up debts under the former president, President Trump. We're continuing to see those debts continue to grow under President Biden. We at some point have to get back to the days of President Ronald Reagan. When Reagan became president, you know, he started talking about we need to shrink the size of government. And these programs they're expanding the size of government. When you expand the size of government, you expand the cost of government. And to pay for that, what we're seeing is huge increases in our national debt, and we cannot continue to do that long term and remain physically solvent.
Is it your belief that we'll have to the country will have to raise the debt ceiling to help pay for these initiatives?
You know, the debt ceiling does not affect any new initiative. The debt ceiling affects money that has previously been spent. And that is something, the debt ceiling expired before we left for our August recess, the very end of July. That is something that we're going to have to address once we return to Washington, D.C. You know, previously what we've seen is to gain support from Republicans and Democrats, there has been talk about reducing spending going forward in an attempt to make it bipartisan. At this point, the Democrats have not agreed to that. They've basically said we need to raise the debt ceiling, and we're not going to make any concessions to people like me who are concerned about the debt. And so that will be one thing that Congress will have to tackle very quickly once we return in September.
Let's talk about Afghanistan. We withdrew from Afghanistan. We threw out the Taliban government and decimated al-Qaeda 20 years ago after 9/11. Your thoughts on the fact that now the Taliban is now back in charge 20 years later? You
know, very, very concerned with the turn of events that we've seen in Afghanistan over the last several weeks. You know, for the last we've not had a fatality in Afghanistan up until the withdrawal since February of 2020. So roughly 18 months that we've had troops in Afghanistan. We've been assisting at that time the Afghan military, conducting raids, making sure that the Taliban and ISIS and other terrorist groups did not have the ability to gain a foothold. Once the decision was made that our troops were going to be removed, I think that the withdrawal was not done appropriately. I think that we should have maintained a larger military presence in Afghanistan. We should have done what the president said. The president promised us it would be an orderly withdrawal and that we would get all Americans out, and also that we would get our Afghan partners out. That didn't happen. We removed too many troops too quickly. The country quickly fell within 11 days of the majority of American troops being withdrawn. And what we saw over there was a mission that was very chaotic. And we saw ultimately the death of 13 Americans who were attempting to assist the Afghan civilians and helping to get our civilians home. I believe that the mission could have been performed substantially different. I believe that we should have not left tens of billions of dollars in military equipment there that are now in the hands of the Taliban, everything from Black Hawk helicopters to Humvees to night vision equipment to M4s, M16. We have left them an arsenal of great weaponry now, things that they've never had. And so I'm very concerned now that with the Taliban back in power, that the 20-year peace that we've had in which America has not been attacked, there's been no attack on American soil, will al-Qaeda, will some terrorist group be able to use Afghanistan as a recruitment base, as a training facility? And I believe that ultimately Americans are less safe the fact that we no longer have a military presence in Afghanistan.
Do you believe the withdrawal was in our overall best interest to leave Afghanistan?
I believe that we should have left a limited number of soldiers in Afghanistan, just like we've done in Korea. You know, we've had soldiers in Korea since the end of the Korean War, and it's maintained a peace between North and South Korea. You know, we had 2,500 soldiers over there who were assisting the Afghan army, and I believe that we should have left those soldiers in place. So I do disagree. I do not feel like that we should have brought those soldiers home. I think that what we were doing was working, that we were seeing in Afghanistan no Americans being attacked, and we saw a stable government that we could work with. Now we see a government run by the Taliban that is going to be working with our adversaries. And I think that the rights of many Afghans are going to go away, the rights that women have, the rights that young females have, to be able to go to school, to open businesses. I think that those rights are going to be lost under Taliban rule. And so I think not only are Americans left safe, but I think the citizens of Afghanistan are going to be oppressed by the Taliban.
And so you believe that we should have been a presence in Afghanistan for how long should we have stayed in Afghanistan?
Well, up until the point that the country was stabilized, and clearly that was not the case. Clearly we saw that once Americans pulled out, that it took only 11 days for the country to fall completely into the hands of the Taliban. But again, we've had troops in Korea, since the end of the Korean War, and that has maintained the peace on the Korean Peninsula between North and South Korea. And so I think that, and we've maintained military bases around the world, Byron. And so we have military bases across the globe where Americans can project power. I think we should have maintained a military base there in Afghanistan so that we could then do a better job of monitoring, gather intelligence, and if the time was necessary to strike if the time was necessary to strike the Taliban, to strike Al Qaeda, to strike ISIS, that we had forces there in the area that we could quickly respond.
So maybe call that we're ending the war, but we're still going to maintain a presence. Is that how we should have termed it in a sense?
Yes, sir. I believe that would have been far better, and that the long-term Americans would have been safer if we would have maintained some sort of military presence there in Afghanistan.
Under the Trump administration, but they wanted to pull out too, just like the Biden administration.
Yeah, and I would disagree, whether it be the Biden administration or the Trump administration, that we should have withdrawn all our troops. And I know that others may feel differently, and that we could always argue, well, at some point we have these endless wars. And I'm not saying that we should maintain a force over there, other than that we maintain bases across this globe for American security and for American operational capacity. And I believe that we should have maintained some sort of presence in Afghanistan.
And our invasion of Afghanistan was after 9/11. What is your memory of 9/11?
I remember on that day, it was a Tuesday morning, coming into the office. At that time, I was working in the DA's office. Was told when I entered work that day that what later we learned to be American Airlines Flight 11 had struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Went to my office, turned on the television. I was supposed to have court later that morning, and was sitting there at my desk watching as the United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. At that point, what was originally at least believed to me to be an aviation accident, we now knew was an act of terror. And so I sat there in the office monitoring television, called to speak with my wife, even though I knew that Mississippi was not a target. You just want to speak with your loved ones, made sure she was aware of what was going on, and continued just to watch the news and monitor the events of the day. Later that day, the judge did call us down the courtroom. He said, I'm going to do something that probably never done before, and if I get in trouble for it, so be it, but I'm going to offer prayer on behalf of our nation. And so there you had law enforcement officers, prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, individuals who were in court that day, criminal defendants, all bowed in prayer as the judge offered a prayer for our country. But I remember being a very solemn day, and I remember the patriotism that I felt for my country. And to see America under attack was something that I think that I'll never forget, and it has had a huge impact on me. And again, as we now come on the 20th anniversary of that, just those memories flooding back, are something that just again the patriotism I feel for my country after that are words that I really can't explain.
Are we safer now than we were 20 years ago?
I believe that we are. I believe the war in Afghanistan is something that helped make us safer. I believe, the standing up of the Homeland Security Committee, which I serve on in the United States Congress, as we're looking now to coordinate between different federal agencies. We saw TSA really stand up after 9/11. We now have the U.S. Air Marshals, which continue to continue to monitor flights. Our intelligence gathering is much better. And so I do believe that we are much better prepared. We will not see another 9/11 style attack in which terrorists are able to hijack airliners and fly them into civilian buildings. But I do have concerns that terrorists could come across our southwest border, particularly with the surge that we've seen there, and find some other method to attack American citizens. We have been very fortunate in the fact that we have been able to prevent numerous attacks since 9/11, and a lot of that is the fact that we have been very diligent, and so we can never let our guard down. We must always remember that there are people across this globe who want to hurt Americans, who want to attack us here on our soil, and we must continue to remain vigilant.
Another critical date we need to discuss is the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol by supporters of President Trump. Your fellow statesman, Democrat Benny Thompson, is leading a congressional investigation of the attack. What are your thoughts on this investigation right now?
You know, I do not support the investigation as it is impaneled now. Originally, there was a 9/11 style commission. A vote was held in Congress. I was one of 35 Republicans who voted to support the 9/11 style commission because I thought that commission was a commission that was designed more to get to the truth of what happened on that day. It was an equally divided commission, 5 Democrat appointees, 5 Republican appointees. No report could have been issued without a majority, so there would have to have been both Republicans and Democrats agree before any report could be issued, before any subpoenas could be issued, and it set a very firm timeline that the investigation had to be complete by the end of the year. I was one of the 35 Republicans who supported that, and one of the reasons I did is I feared that if we did not support that, then we would have what we have now. And what we have now is a committee that has been handpicked by Nancy Pelosi. Many members on that committee are former individuals who were part of the Trump impeachment, Adam Schiff being one of those individuals. While the committee is technically bipartisan in nature, the 2 Republicans that serve are part of the anti-Trump wing of the Republican Party. And so, you know, while I support a fair investigation of what happened, I do not support the current committee and their makeup because I do not believe that they will ultimately get to the truth of the matter of what happened that day.
Yeah, Liz Cheney and Kinzinger are the ones that are on there, but why didn't more Republicans join that panel to try to maybe balance it out?
Well, if you recall, Kevin McCarthy made his appointments to the bipartisan commission, and those several of those were rejected by Speaker Pelosi. She rejected 2 of the 5 appointees, and McCarthy said, look, I'm not going to allow you to pick and choose. These are the 5 Republicans that I think need to be on that committee, and either you're going to seat all of the Republicans or you're going to seat none of them. And so at that point, Pelosi rejected the other Republican members that McCarthy had tried to put on the committee, and Pelosi personally reached out to Cheney early on to serve, and then later reached out to Kinzinger. And I think part of the reason is because of their very public criticism of Donald Trump. And so while this originally I had hoped would be an equally divided bipartisan commission, I think it has very quickly become partisan. And I think at this point, clearly the target of this investigation is Donald Trump.
Let's talk about border immigration. Your U.S. Customs and Border Protection data shows that the number of migrants detained along the Mexican border exceeded 200,000 in July. That's the first time that it's happened in 21 years. How do you grade this administration on border security?
You know, I would say that they receive a failing grade. I think everything that we've seen since the president was sworn in, and even actually since President Biden was elected, moving up to the swearing in, we see the numbers have continued to grow across our southwest border. We see that, as you said, those numbers are at a 21-year high. Over 200,000 attempted to enter the country illegally, with the most recent stats that we have, which I think are for our numbers for July. And so as those numbers have continued to grow, it is creating a very chaotic situation along our border. It is creating a humanitarian crisis as we're looking as how we're going to make sure that we are taking care of the people that come across the border. I think it's also creating a great deal of unrest in many of your border communities. And so very early on, we saw when President Biden was elected, he immediately did away with the Remain in Mexico policy, which now the court has reinstated, basically said that the president did not have the authority to do away with that like he said. And I think the other thing that continues to drive, or one of the drivers along the southwest border, is the continued talks of amnesty. We see that is something that the Democrats are talking about, wanting some sort of amnesty component in the $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill. Some of the information we're receiving is that people are trying to rush to get across the border because they want to be in the country if that legislation ultimately passes, in hopes that they will be able to take advantage of that. And so we've seen a great deal of unrest along our border. Again, I am concerned as it relates to national security now that we see the Taliban back in control in Afghanistan. If we see terrorist groups continue to try to train terrorists and send those individuals into the U.S., the easiest way for them to enter would be across our unsecured southwest border.
There's always been a huge demand for immigrant labor, whether legal or illegal, but should some of those businesses who hire them be held liable?
If you're hiring people illegally, yes, I think all day long. I support legal immigration. This country was built on legal immigration. I think we should be bringing in the best and the brightest into the United States, people who have degrees in things such as medicine, engineering, computers. Those are the people that we want to come to the United States. We also need that many of our farming communities, that they need that seasonal labor, and we have programs for those. And I have been an advocate of expanding those programs, of modernizing those programs. But we want to be able to properly vet individuals coming in the country, and then those individuals that do come, we want to make sure that they have a place to live, that they have a job to go to, and that they're going to be productive members of the community once they enter. And that's not what we've seen along the border. We've seen people continue to flood across the border. Particularly, we've seen an upsurge in what they call unaccompanied minors, children under the age of 18 who are coming across without parents. And again, it is creating a great strain on our immigration system, on our law enforcement along the southwest border as we are trying to care for those. I went to a processing center in Donna, Texas earlier this year for unaccompanied minors. And when I was there, a facility that was supposed to hold 250 people had individuals at that time of over 4,000. They said that previously, the week before, they had over 5,000. And so you have a center which is several hundred times over capacity because we were not prepared for what we saw happened after January of this year.
Let's talk real quickly about COVID. With the Delta variant surging, our hospitals overwhelmed, a lot of hostility between masking and vaccines and whether there should be mandates or not. Your thoughts on what's going on, particularly here in Mississippi, as well, how we're handling things and what Mississippians need to do?
I've encouraged everyone to be vaccinated. I recently participated in the Vax Up Y'all public service announcements that we've seen running and various websites. I would tell everyone that I believe that the vaccine is safe. It was developed under Operation Warp Speed, which was a Trump initiative, a totality of government approach where we were working very diligently to form a vaccine. And both myself, my wife, my entire family, we've been vaccinated. So I encourage everyone, because I think that the vaccine, even if it doesn't prevent the Delta variants, I believe that it prevents the severity that we've seen by many people who have been hospitalized, who have had to go on ventilators, because it seems to me that the Delta variants has affected people, particularly younger people, in a much more severe manner than the alpha variants that we originally saw. But I would say that I would agree with Governor Reeves is that this should not be a government mandated, whether it be masking or vaccine. Those should be personal decisions, and I have encouraged everyone to do their research as it relates to the vaccine. Talk to your family, consult with your physician, but then ultimately I hope and pray that those individuals will become vaccinated, because I think that is the best thing that we can do. As it relates to mask mandates, I think that those decisions are best made on a local level, as it relates to schools. My son's currently in the Rankin County school system. That school system has gone to a mask mandate at this point based on the number of cases. And so I think that each school system, each city, each county needs to look at the infection rate in their area and make that determination. We saw that, that was something that many states went to early on with the mandatory mask requirements. In some cases it worked, in other cases it didn't. And so again, I think that government is best when it's more localized government, and I think that those decisions are made better by your county board of supervisors, your local city officials, your local school officials, than made up whether it be Washington, D.C. or even in Jackson at the state capitol.
What do you say to those people who are angry at their local officials for making those decisions?
At this point, no one here has mandated those things, other than maybe some of the school districts which have mandated masks in some instances. And I think that those people are trying to balance public health versus your privacy rights, and those can be very difficult decisions to make. I believe that those school districts, because I have talked to our superintendent, they are concerned with the health of the children. They want to employ those mask mandates to protect the children, but they also want those mandates to expire as quickly as possible. I think no one wants long-term for individuals to have to wear masks. I know that it's something that none of us enjoy, and it's something that hopefully ultimately, as we see the vaccination rate, as we see natural immunity from those people who have been infected with COVID, I hope very quickly that masks are a thing of the past.
All right, Congressman Michael Guest, always a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us.
Byron, thank you.
All right.
Good to see you.
It's good seeing you. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.